it's funny, a lot of people will say when the market's hot, oh, gee, it must be a great time to be a developer. It's actually the opposite, because while the prices might be moving up on what you're selling, they're moving up extraordinarily on what you're buying.
You are listening to the Property Developer Podcast, your home for tips, ideas and inspiration to help take your developing to the next level. Now here's your host, Justin Getty.
Hello and welcome to episode 45 of the show. Thank you for joining me. I trust you are well. I'm doing great. I have another interesting conversation coming up with a property developer who has come a long way and who mentored me on how to develop property. Before I get to that, here's what I've been up to lately. I've been continuing to work on the early planning phase of my new site. We have worked through a couple of layouts for the site and had to ditch my preferred scheme due to some issues with the site levels, which affected the upper stories and meant that they were inside the res code required setbacks. So after trying to make it work, we had to abandon the design and go with a simpler layout. The layout we have settled on is more efficient and allows us more space for landscaping and a bit more freedom with the design. We're now getting some initial traffic advice on parking and turning circles and refining the size and types of properties to include. The property has now been leased and a tenant has just moved in, and they understand that it is a development project and the house will be demolished in the short term, and that suits them. We're still trying to finalise a funding solution with the bank, and it is proving challenging to convince them to fund the acquisition, even though we have a very strong application. I suspect that unless a deal fits tightly into a nice little box, the banks are looking for reasons not to fund it, but they don't tell you that at the start of the application process. Anyway, we will see where that leads, if anywhere. Now, normally I would remind you that if you're interested in learning how to develop property, to drop me an email, as I've partnered with the people who taught me how to develop, to help you realise your dream of becoming a developer. But today I am going to go one better, and bring you a discussion with the guy who created the program. You can still email me if you want to know more about the program at justin@propertydeveloperpodcast.com, and you might be inspired to do that after hearing this conversation. So I first spoke with Troy Harris in 2012 about doing his property developing mentoring program. And after signing up and going through the program, I secured my first development site and eventually completed my first project, which, as you know, ended up being a 20 townhouse project that was way bigger than I ever intended. But I successfully got there in the end, and it was a terrific experience. And I couldn't have done it without Troy's help. When I started the podcast, Troy was on my early list of people I wanted to have on the show, so I'm excited to be finally bringing him to you. We ended up having quite a long chat as we meandered down memory lane and cover how Troy started off doing a couple of renovations before starting his development career in Ballarat in regional Victoria. Since then, Troy has completed a stack of projects and set up a program to help wannabe developers. I have broken this conversation up into two parts. So in part one, we cover how Troy went from owning a retail shop to developing, the biggest obstacles he has had to overcome, and what he has learnt along the way. Keep an ear out for Troy talking about what holds people back from taking on developing. I started off by asking Troy what he would eat until he was sick.
Oh, probably lamb roast. That'd be the number one. The lamb roast and the veggies. I could just, eat that. But we tend to do it, particularly with the kids. We make sure we buy way more than we could possibly eat in one meal, and we make our own version of souvlaki's the next night.
Oh, very good.
Just cut it up, cook it up with some wraps and some sauces and some veggies. And I'm sure the Greeks wouldn't agree with our version of it, but the kids are very happy with it. And very much enjoy the lamb roast.
Oh, you're the first person that's come up with a roast of some description that's reasonably healthy.
Well, it can be. Yeah.
Not with the duck fat on the roast potatoes.
No, generally pretty healthy in regards to that. We generally have a pretty good diet when the kids are here, at least, anyway.
Now, you and I have somewhat of a history, being you were the guy that mentored me to become a property developer, and we'll get into that a little bit later on. And we've come full circle, being that I first heard of you on a property podcast, which then prompted me to realise that developing was what I wanted to do. And we'll also get to that later. But if you could give us a bit of a background about how you got into developing, because you've got a bit of an interesting pathway into it.
Look, it does go back quite a while, and it was overcoming a lot of mental hurdles, which I think most people have the same issues. My background is certainly not of trade or anything to do with the building industry. I was probably lucky to stumble across a friend and who became a mentor who saw something in me that I probably didn't see and helped me to get started. And it started with, like I suppose a lot of people, with a buy, reno, sell. Which was a very, very old homestead in North Blackburn in Victoria. If anyone knows the area, I'd be very surprised to hear about a homestead there, because it obviously dates back a long time before it was surrounded by residential homes. Did very well out of that one. Thought I knew everything I had to know, and made a small loss on the next one, which was a slight replica, except for a number of mistakes. From there, I sort of realised that renovating wasn't for me. I felt I spent too much time actually on site, even though I wasn't doing all the work. I spent a lot of time there coordinating the plumbers and the electricians and all the work that I couldn't do myself, and thought that there must be a better way of doing this. Not that there's anything wrong with renovating. I know a lot of people are very successful renovating. It just wasn't quite for me. From there, I knew some people doing some small developments, and decided that was the way forward for me, but it sounded a whole lot more scary than doing a buy, reno, sell. All this, knocking things over and all the rest of it at the time sounded very, very scary. So I'd had myself convinced I was going to buy one, but there was some part of me that had me convinced that I wasn't going to, or made excuses why I didn't. And over the probably decades since then, I've seen a lot of people have come up with the same or their own versions of those excuses, that while they're outwardly gung-ho and racing towards getting started, there's a big anchor dragging along behind them that is self-imposed. From there, again, another person, another mentor helped me get started up in Ballarat, which was, from memory, it was a little corner block for about $133,000 in a suburb of Ballarat, which I thought that was probably safe enough. I couldn't do too much damage if I didn't know what I was doing there. For 133 grand, I got a house on a corner with a backyard. I didn't have to knock the house over. I had to do a bit of a reno, and I knew I could do that. And just build a little single level 3-bedder on the back or on the side, and that was all fine. And we made a small profit, and that was my start in property developing.
I think you were pretty hands-on there, weren't you? I seem to recall a story where you were camping out overnight in the living room to save money and save time from travelling?
Yes, well, Ballarat being probably the best part of 2 hours away from home, what I was generally doing would be I'd head off early one morning with a view to staying 2 days and come back the next night and get as much done as I could in a couple of days. Had started a young family, or it was about to at that stage. And yes, it was like camping out. Well, it was inside the house. The house was an older house which was originally transported there from another location. And while doing the renovation, I noticed actually there was no insulation in it whatsoever. And for those who know Ballarat, it is very, very cold, particularly in winter. So we had the old Canara that was the only heating in the house. So I used to load up on wood, and basically while during the day I'd do my development work and looking for another site by this stage. And then of the evening I'd be doing the renovations, like the painting and so forth. So I'd be painting away until my eyes got a little bit droopy and I wasn't painting straight anymore, and it was time to go to bed. So I'd load up the little Canara with as much wood as I possibly could, and I'd drag the mattress up there, and I'd drag that out from hiding from the renovations, and put that in the lounge room in front of the fire, and put as much wood on as I possibly could. And then I'd wake up about 4 o'clock in the morning, absolutely freezing, just a little bit of an ember showing. So I'd have to stack it full of wood again and warm up enough to get through the second half of my sleep before I could get going the second day and head down to McDonald's and get myself a coffee and some breakfast before starting my day.
And so, did you sell both of those properties? So there's one on the back?
Yes, that's right.
At the front?
Yeah, we ended up doing 5 projects in Ballarat all up, and sold them all. Didn't keep any of those. For probably a couple of reasons. There wasn't a lot of growth prospects there. So if you're holding on to something, it's probably not going to be worth a whole lot more in any immediate period of time. Plus, also developing being an enterprise where you do need a fair bit of cash, it's a lot easier, certainly in regards to the banks, to be able to cash out, even though you're paying tax on your profits, to be able to cash that out, to use that cash moving forward into your next project and buying more. And, doing one little corner block was not going to provide me an income. So I needed to do bigger sites, more sites, to be able to put food on the table for my family. So I sort of needed to cash out on those and keep building and growing.
So you did 5 in Ballarat, 5 projects,
Yep.
all a similar type?
No, that was a smaller one. The next one, I kept an old weatherboard and put 3 on the back. The one after that was kept an lovely little old miner's cottage, tiniest little house you come across. Actually, when we were selling that, after we'd built, but there was quite a lot of interest in property at the time. We had an open. We actually had to. It was almost like a nightclub. Had to wait for people to leave before they could come in. The house was that small. You could only fit in about 12 people at a time. And then from there, a couple of other projects where you keep the house and build 5 on the next ones. So while they're fairly sizable, at Ballarat being a smaller entry point, some of these properties were selling for under 200,000. The new 2 bedrooms for under a couple of $100,000. And back then, the federal and the state government were very kind to first home buyers at the end of the GFC. And I sold one property for $190,000 to a young lady, first home buyer, who got $36,500 in grants. So that's a nice kickstart for a first home buyer. That's quite a good deposit.
And I recall you saying somewhere that your first project was profitable, which gave you the incentive or encouraged you to then keep going. You thought, yes, I can do this. But your second one wasn't profitable, is that correct?
That was with the renovations. That was before I started developing. So yeah, made a very good profit on the first. Combination of a number of things. I was pretty pleased at the effort I put in, and also a little bit of luck. I found a really good buyer who was just the perfect property for them. So I sold it for a bit more than I was expecting to. That's a nice win. We take the wins when we have them, but I guess that did give me a little bit of overconfidence, and I didn't put anywhere near as much research into the second one, and which was just again an older weatherboard, a renovation and sell. Had a bit of problems and couldn't find the perfect buyer that would pay the good price. Ended up making a small loss of, I think probably it was about 10 or 12,000. So fortunately, not anything too dramatic, and only a small part of what I'd made on the previous one. But it was a real kick in the pants. Not so much financially, but for confidence, and that's where I had a period of time where I did struggle with the confidence to move forward, particularly going into something that's potentially perceived as more complicated and more difficult in the developing. So it did take a little while.
Tell us a little bit more about that. What were the lessons that you learned? What were the hurdles that you had to overcome, be that mental, to then give you the ability to take on developing? Because there's a pretty big step going from a small loss-making reno project to then taking on a property development project, even if it's only a duplex.
Yeah, look, it certainly was. So there's lessons of, I guess, on the property side, and there's also lessons of the mindset. On the property I just didn't do enough research. I figured that because similar properties, although they were quite different, they were just a small 3-bedroom home. But one was a weatherboard that had been on a block that had been cut up and probably been put on the back sometime before that, compared to almost like a heritage old, a very unique property, which when we found the right buyer who paid a very good price for it, whereas the other one, there was a lot more of them around. It wasn't unique. Although the suburbs are only a couple of suburbs apart, in Donvale, the price of a property can be a little bit hard to read if you don't read the numbers very well, put a lot of research into it, which I didn't do. It's a very much a suburb of opposites. It's almost like you don't. I looked at the suburb overall, where you needed to look at the pockets. in Donvale, there's some newer homes on much larger blocks as it's bordering on rural, and it's also got some older homes which aren't worth nearly as much. But then you put a median price in, and you sort of split the two. And because I was working on the lower end, I had a higher value. I thought I got it at a pretty good price, when in reality I didn't. And I thought I could add value to it, whereas I couldn't add as much value as I thought I could. And that's where basically what I expected to get for it in the end was well short of what I ended up getting, and that was fair enough because that's what the market was. It wasn't the market that was wrong; it was me, as is always the case. So we can't argue with the market because the market's always right, regardless of whether it is or isn't. So that was on the property side of things, but then sort of that knocks your confidence around a little bit too. So also in between all that was around about with the GFC, and I thought, well, in the meantime, I'll do a little bit of playing with some shares. And my timing was pretty poor on that, and I lost some money with shares. So I've gone from a loss and a loss, which takes a bit out of your confidence. So I guess that's why, when I did start, it was at the very lowest, cheapest, easiest end. And that was, like, as I've spoken with you many times in the past about mindset, I needed something like that to get started. And it did change quite significantly and very quickly because, as I said, I had a mentor who was helping me, who's also in the Ballarat market at the time. And I remember we'd started down the process. We got plans into council, and I rang him up one day and said, look, I'm a little bit concerned. Can you give me a hand? He said, well, what's the matter? He said, I think I'm missing something. He said, okay, right. So we caught up, and he said, okay, well, what have you done? What do you think you're missing? I said, well, I'm not really sure. He said, okay, what have you done? So I went through, and I've done this, I've done that, and done that. He said, yeah, that's it. I go, what do you mean? There's got to be more to it than that. He's gone, no, that's it. Really? You sure? Yep, that's it. And it was. And from that moment on, I'm going, okay, well, I just got to replicate this. The same process, make sure I don't make the mistakes of earlier where I get a little bit ahead of myself. And if I do my really detailed research and do enough of that and follow the process and tick all the boxes that need to be ticked, I just got to do it again and again.
And so, but what was the leap that you were able to make from going from renovation to developing? Why did you decide that you were going to shift strategies?
I needed, that was my income. I didn't have a job outside of that. Prior to that, I'd had a business, a toy shop, and I'd sold that. So that was my form of income. So I needed to do something. Otherwise, I'd go back and have to get a job. And I was never really good at a job. I didn't want to go back to do that. So I had to do something. Started with the renovations, which seemed to work fairly well, but I felt that the amount of time I spent in doing these renovations for the return, I wasn't going to be able to build and increase my business being that hands-on to have a decent enough income based on that. Now, that's not necessarily the case. I know plenty of people who do make a very, very good income doing exactly that, but I didn't feel that was for me. So I had to do something different, and the next logical step that I saw at the time was to move into developing, and I'd known a number of people who had done exactly that, start off as renovations and then move into developing, particularly if you're doing a reno and develop.
So you're covering both bases.
Oh, look, a little bit, and it felt safer. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is, and I've seen, unfortunately, other people fall over with a reno develop that they haven't done properly, and they've still managed to lose money. But for me, that was the logical step. And since I've discovered, looking back for me, and I've seen it in many other people, it's about what you're looking at the time you're ready to take that step, to take that action, is what you'll go forward with. Because I think most people who are going down the wealth creation path, or particularly the ones who are looking to do something that can eliminate their need to have a job, they've all got those skills and qualities to be successful at virtually anything they do, and all they need is a vehicle. And there's a lot of things out there that I know people are successful running businesses. I know people successful in shares, renovations, developing, all those sort of things. And I reckon if they had have decided to go down a different path, they would have been successful as that. I know people have been very successful doing things like Amway, multi-level marketing, have done very, very well, and those people would be great at developing or running shares or anything like that. And I think a lot of it is just when mentally you click that this is nothing's going to stop me. I'm going to do whatever I need to do and be successful at it. Whatever you happen to be looking at the time is what you'll go ahead and you'll be successful at. And that was the same for me, and I've seen a lot of people do exactly the same thing in a variety of different fields.
And so what was it that attracted you to developing? What do you think it gives back to you? What do you get out of it?
Oh, it's a very flexible a way of creating wealth. I mean, whether it be still as an employee or a business owner, or particularly for myself, where this is my form of income, and having young kids, that I'm lucky that the flexibility allows me to be able to do things with them, and whether that and other people in other circumstances, it might be with their partner, they might have an interest in sport or something like that. They give a lot of flexibility. Like, sure, there's plenty of times I've got to have meetings with draftees and banks and all that, but generally you're not locked into have to be there at any given time or something like that. You just make an appointment at the time that suits you. Like, generally most people, as I did when you asked me to come on this podcast, I said, look, I'm pretty good during school hours. With a bit of notice, I'm 99% sure during school hours. So, unless I get a call from the school that someone's fallen over and hurt themselves, I'm generally pretty good. And that's where I make most of my appointments, so that I'm free to do what I need to do with the kids, and that's my priority. Whereas someone else, if it's a sport that they might need training in the afternoon, then hey, I'm available in the mornings. With work, people can make phone calls and emails at lunchtime, before work, after work. I used to, particularly during busy periods, get the kids off the bed. And they, being young, they go off to bed reasonably early, and then I jump on the computer and reply to 5 emails, because it doesn't matter whether I send them at 6 o'clock at night or midnight. The person's going to read them when they come into work the next day, whether that be the bank or the draftee or the council or whatever the case may be. So the flexibility is the great benefit to me.
Yeah, I enjoy that as well. I mean, I've gone off to do reading with the kids. My kids are at primary school. You can go and sit there and do half an hour of reading with them, or help out when they go to swimming. Just little things like that are a little bit difficult if you're working full-time in the city or somewhere else. So yeah, that definitely is a great benefit of being self-employed.
Oh, look, it's fantastic. I do exactly the same thing. I love it, and I feel very, very fortunate to be able to be in a position to be able to do that. Whereas I know there's a lot of other people who'd love to do that, but they just can't, because the boss isn't going to let you have every Monday morning off to go to swimming lessons, or to go into the school and read or something like that. And particularly the more flexible things where you need to come and go and different things like that. So having a full-time work doesn't allow you to do that.
So you said you worked in retail. You had a toy store. What about that wasn't inspiring to you? What made you look elsewhere for something to do with your life?
There's probably a couple of main things. One, I didn't make any money. So I was
that's always motivating.
So I was kind of a volunteer, but also is in direct contrast to what we're just talking about. Retail has retail hours, and I had to be there at 9 o'clock to open up. I had to be there till 5 o'clock to close down. And while you do it, depending on your business, you do have some staff and things like that. You're still very restricted, and particularly if the person who's opening up tomorrow rings in at 8:45 and says, "Oh, I'm sick, I'm not coming in." You got to drop everything and do that. And I had the shop before I had children, which they kind of quite haven't realised that Dad used to own a toy shop.
Probably best they don't know that.
Yes. they do understand, but they haven't quite clicked at what they've missed out on.
Yes, that's right.
But I didn't have children then. But what if I was on the way to school, taking them to school, and then get the phone call? What do I do? I've got to take them to school, which means I open late and miss customers and get in trouble with centre management and all the rest of it. So those are ultimately the two things. So many business lessons which have helped me. Particularly running a business that wasn't successful, you learn how to be very clever, to sort of mix and match things, and make sure you get your bills paid even when there is not so much money coming in and things like that. But yeah, it wasn't making any money, and it was taking a whole lot of time to not make that money. So it's time to move on, and that in itself was a real mental struggle. I'm a great believer. I'm not a religious person. I'm a believer that you get what you deserve in life, And I worked really, really hard for a few years, really long hours. And you hear of so many businesses that take a few years before they finally click and then start being profitable. And that was my fear, that I was walking away just before it was becoming profitable. But even with the benefit of hindsight, it was not going to be.
So you just mentioned a couple of lessons that you learned from the toy store not going particularly well. Paying bills on time. What were some of the other ones?
Just a management of time, which sort of comes in, as we were talking about, sort of, even though we've got the flexibility, sort of manage it, that even though, I'm pretty well available between school hours, I sort of make sure that I do everything that I need to do and make sure things get done on time, because also a belief that I'm the one that sets the standard for the time frame between those people I deal with. If a drafty sends me an email and I take a week to get back to him and expect him to reply to me an hour later, that's unrealistic. I set the standard, and I don't think anyone ever exceeds that standard that I set. However, the lower I set it, the lower they go. The longer they take to get back to me, particularly, those people, it's not in their best interest to get things back. They're always, people are always busy and always looking to put things off. But if I'm constantly coming back to them straight away, then I think they feel a little bit of obligation to get back to me sooner rather than later.
I always don't like to be the guy that's holding something up.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm, a great view that, if a drafty's going to send me something, say, look, they're going to send it to me, and say, righto, and I get on it straight away and get, if they're asking me a couple of questions about a design or something like that, or if the bank is asking me a couple of questions about the loan because I've, forgotten to ask it earlier, I just try to get back to them as soon as possible and keep that moving, because time's always the concern, that nobody's as concerned about your time as you are. I'm sure you know that very well.
I do, and no one has as much love for your project as you do.
Not even close.
Well, let's jump back to Ballarat.
Yep.
So you're progressively getting bigger. What did you learn along the way? What were the lessons you were learning from project to project that kept you going?
There's a whole lot. It's all sort of flooding back to mind now. Probably still making mistakes, in that once I had that conversation we spoke about earlier, that there wasn't anything that I was missing. I actually was doing all there was. And particularly it's up at the time in Ballarat, it was pretty cheap to buy. The first one was a cheap one, 133,000. The second one I bought, I think, was 180. It was either 180, 190. And next one was 205. And we're putting 3 and 4 units onto these. Plus the houses themselves are worth nearly as much as what we're paying for them without the land attached to them. So it was fairly easy to move into that. And the banks were being nice then, and I'd just roll up to my bank, who I'd had a pretty good relationship with for a number of years, and I've bought another one, here's the things, and here's the numbers and valuations, everything, and they'd go, yeah, no worries, Troy, here's 80%, no problem, until I got to the fourth one, and the bank said no. He said, you can't service it. I said, I know, I haven't been able to service any of them. Well, this is a concern now, Troy. I go, okay. So I had to do a bit of scrounging around, because unfortunately this one, it was a pretty good buy, but the vendor had some complications and needed a very short settlement. So I bought this on a 30-day settlement. And that's the one that the bank said no to, of course. So I had to scramble around to get the funds to settle that one. Fortunately, it was only... it was about 190,000, that one. So it wasn't like buying in Melbourne where you're paying multiples of that. Might have been a little bit harder to find the cash to settle that one. But that was also before we started finishing them. So I'm buying the fourth one before I finished the first one. So in hindsight, I've probably got a little bit ahead of myself. But the properties were there. Each of the projects were profitable. I had no doubt around that. So it was just a matter of moving forward. And there was nothing ever that was high risk. Because like I said, even if... with the banks, surprisingly, saying no at the time. Not surprisingly now, but it was at the time. It wasn't an enormous hurdle to overcome, to be able to find a couple $100,000. There's plenty of money out there if you've got a project to show people. Plenty of people who are interested in becoming a developer, who really wants to but is scared out of their pants of doing it, but would be happy to put some money in with someone who knows what they're doing, and share the profit that way, rather than, particularly nowadays where you're sticking the money in the bank and getting, about 2.8%, I think you can get on a term deposit now. So, as a developer, I'm borrowing from the bank at, twice that. There's plenty of people around.
So you've done 5 projects in Ballarat over what sort of time period?
Good question. It was probably over about 3 years, because as I said, we'd bought the 4th one before we finished the first one. The 5th one was a little bit later on. That was as a joint venture with someone who wanted to get started. Asked me to come in on the deal as, I guess, as a more of an advisor than actually doing all the work. So that was the final thing for me. As much as I wasn't being the only one doing that, I was sort of less involved, and the trips to Ballarat got a little bit harder.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, that's quite a decent acceleration for a man who's just getting started in property developing.
Yeah, look, and there's a number of things for that. I was holding myself back through my own self-inflicted fears and so forth, but at the time, once I worked out, I knew what I was doing, and it wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. And I'm sure a lot of people listening who haven't done one before think it's a lot more than what it is. When I used to do some of the training, I used to talk about the 4 pillars, and without going into that now, there was 4 key things that you needed to get right. And there's another 1,000 things you could probably get wrong, and you still make profit.
Still remember those 4 pillars, Troy.
I might have stolen the idea from when I was over in Kokoda on the memorial there, but
they stack up. I still use them as a foundation of my thinking.
Oh, it is, and it's just some really key points that you need to make sure you get absolutely right, and you get everything else wrong. People worry too much about whether they should have a bath, a shower over bath, or just a shower, or a bath and a shower, and where the toilet needs to go, the colour of the tiles, and do I render it, or do I, all the rest of the stuff. Really, you're talking about questions that might end up making $1,000 difference on $1 million project. But the 4 key things about buying well, knowing what you're going to do with it, and particularly what the prices are going to be for your build and your sales prices. If you get those right, you can stuff everything else up and still make good money. And people just got the focus. Some people just got the focus in the wrong areas.
So by now you've got something of a process in place, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it was ongoing, and to this day still is. It's every time you do something, you learn a little bit about it. Either that's excuse me, the best way of doing it, or there's a slightly better way, or that you need to do something a little bit different in a slightly different type, a different area. And as you go along, you build up a team of people, and some stay with you for a long time, and some let you down at the first call, and some let you down a little bit later on. It's always learning. If you stop learning, it's going to be a bit of a concern. Yeah,
well, we'll come back to team members. So you're in Ballarat. When do you shift to Melbourne?
Well, it's funny. At one stage, we almost shifted to Ballarat to give up the commuting with a view that we'd keep going, and then just around at the same time started thinking about doing some developing in Melbourne, and then realised I'm going to move to Ballarat and then commute back to Melbourne to develop. That's not very wise. So decided to start back in Melbourne. Look, obviously with the time and also with the family, like the days I could go to Ballarat was becoming affected by it, because now with a growing family going off to kinder and things like that, you set around times that you don't have control over. Up until then, I had control over all the time frames, but as much as a self-employed property developer, you get to choose when and where. You don't get to choose the rest of the world. And as you know, the kids have this thing on at this certain time, and you sort of, if you want to be there, you need to work around that. So the 2 hours up and back to Ballarat the trip seemed to get longer every time. I remember I had to drive up there once to sign a document and then drive back. And I was up there and just going, I need to find something else to do to justify being here. So I went out for lunch or something, but and it just got a little bit harder, and also the view of taking all that knowledge and bringing all that forward into Melbourne, and I could buy one just around the corner. I was looking around that the area that I lived in, the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, was pretty good for developing. So why am I travelling all this way?
Yeah, I think you once mentioned around the cost of construction doesn't vary a huge amount across the state.
No, it doesn't.
Yes, it'll be a little bit more in a big city, but say compared to Ballarat to Melbourne, not a massive change from a lower socioeconomic area, for example, to an affluent area.
The construction,
It's
the only
hugely different.
No, the only variation in the construction really is the level of inclusions. Whereas Ballarat, we were just working on being the cheapest new properties available, particularly with the grants being offered. So we had a very large first home buyer population there that were likely to be buyers. We sold mostly to first home buyers, very few to investors. And that's for some of these young kids in their early 20s. To get a new home, even though it's a small unit with just the basic everything, what a great start. Rather than, most people, their first home was an old rundown old thing, way out whoop whoop, they had to, sit on boxes and things like that. These kids, end up 15-20% deposit thanks to the governments. Didn't need a lot of cash, just needed a job, and they could buy a brand new home. That's pretty handy.
Very good. And so what was the first project in Melbourne?
I was in Mitcham, which was a really old rundown old weatherboard, which is pretty well falling apart, covered with trees. It had been on the market for quite some time, and there was just trees everywhere, and obviously it scared everybody off. But when we got in there, there was only one tree of any real concern, and once we got advice that we'd be able to get rid of that, then it became a clear site. And it was a tightish 3-unit site, but done a fair bit of work on looking at some comparable sites and what designs and shapes and sizes and everything could get in there. And we got ourselves a drafty that we had trust in, and went to him before we went unconditional on the purchase to say we need to get 3 on here based on our numbers, and we expect them to look like this. Can you get them on? Because we need to know before we buy it. He came back with confidence that he could, so we went ahead and we bought it.
And so what concerns did you have moving areas? It's a pretty big shift in geographic area.
Yeah, look, it sure is, and it was certainly a lot dearer. Now I'm trying to remember what we paid for that, but it was certainly more than double what I was paying up in Ballarat for a smaller site. And this was also the first one to knock over and completely rebuild with the 3 units on there. So it was quite different. The advantages were it's close to home. The profit per unit was obviously higher. But the thing is, we had to start a whole new team. Mm-hmm. Couldn't use any of the drafties and the builders and things like that. I managed to keep hold of my my legal advisor and the conveyancer, which I still use to this day, even though they're in Ballarat. They've been fantastic, and we've developed a way that we can do everything that we need to do by email, by phone, and by express post, which is great. But pretty well everyone else we had to change over. So we had to go and do that, go through the process of finding a drafty, finding a builder, and so forth, which is a little bit time consuming. But once you've got them, it's a lot easier because, well, some you'll keep for your next project, some you'll be disappointed by and move on, but you'll know why. And while you're doing that project and being disappointed by that particular team or team member, you can be looking for others as well, particularly around drafties and builders. You're keeping an eye as you're keeping your eye out on the local market. You're coming across those whether you like it or not.
Yeah, I think that's a constant evolutionary process when you're a developer, is whittling away at the team to try and get those A-grade players that you want to continue working with. Oh,
absolutely. And, different people are in different circumstances of their life. I've had team members who have been really good for a number of projects and then all of a sudden just change out of nowhere and become completely different. And then it's, time to move on and find another one who hopefully will replace them.
And so what process or what steps did you go through to then try and find those team members? So your drafter, your builder, what were you going through? Were you just looking up people in was it Yellow Pages back then, or was Google around by this stage?
I think Google was around by then. I'm pretty sure I might have even had a mobile phone that would fit in my pocket. But different team members there's a different strategy. For example, with a drafty, I'm after a drafty who can really add value, because there's no point getting a cheap drafty who puts 2 units on a 3-unit site, because that's going to cost you a fortune. For me, the drafties, between the cheaper one and the dearer one, you're talking maybe $10,000 across a project, whereas they can add or subtract $50,000 or $100,000. So the money wasn't an issue for me, it was how good they were about in that area, that they could show me that they could do something similar to what I was doing. That they didn't have the ego that they wanted to make it all pretty, but not profitable, which is for their best interest, because they want to show potential clients how wonderful this is. They don't show a balance sheet to a potential client. They'll show a pretty picture. For me, I'm not too fussed what it looks like, as long as what I'm building is able to be sold for the price that I expect to get to make the expected profit. That's all the intent for me. So drafties don't always, probably the ones that are a little bit more architectural than draftsmen. So for me, it's not so much price, it's the ability and attitude, and also around time frame. We don't want this dragging on. It takes long enough at council as it is. We don't want it taking extra time to get into council. So for me was attitude and ability, followed by time frame, and the price was further down the track. When it comes to something like a builder, price comes into it, of course, because you're not talking 10,000, you might be talking 100,000. And if you're doing a project that might be making, say, a 3-unit site might make $150,000 profit, but then you come up and your builder is $100,000 dearer than you expect, all of a sudden you're only making 50. And if the price moves on the properties by, say, 10,000 a unit, you're down to 20. You don't want to be doing a development for $20,000. So for a builder, you're obviously looking at quality. You're also looking at time frame, because the longer they hold it for, holding up the process, the more it costs you. And also, if you're waiting to get to the end to sell one or more of them, the longer it takes for that as well. So there's a lot of costs involved. But you also want obviously a quality of builder, the quality of finish. You do have all the insurances for the main concerns, the structural and all the rest of it. But at the same time, there's different qualities of finish. And if you're selling on completion, having a good quality home stands out and gets you the premium price and also a good quick sale. Whereas if the quality's poor, you're probably going to have to take some of the price off, because there's always going to be others around. And if you're a buyer looking through yours, which isn't all that good a quality, and the one down the road's a really good quality, it's a no-brainer what they're going to buy, and unless you discount it to make it attractive. If you're trying to sell a BMW equivalent home and you've dished up a Hyundai, apologies to Hyundai drivers, you're going to have to drop to a Hyundai price because they don't sell for the same price as a BMW, and that's pretty logical.
Yeah, one of my guests had a really good suggestion in terms of how you can track down the good consultants and people in the area, and that's you go to the agents. Real estate agents tend to know, or the people that sell off the plan have a good idea around who the decent builders are.
Certainly.
They'll generally know who the drafties or architects who have an understanding of the area is, and same for town planners. So if you can go and talk to them.
Yep.
Oh, and the builders. So builders usually can give you leads on who the good designers are.
It certainly can.
So you sort of start working around that sort of circle, and if you get common names coming up, they're usually worth going to talk to.
I think that's the key, to have the common names, because you ask a builder sort of who's a good drafty. His best mate might be the drafty, and he might be a crap drafty. He might even use him himself. With something like builders, it's sometimes a lot easier to see, because you can actually just drive around the neighbourhood and you'll see work under construction, and even just things like even if they haven't got to the point of nearing completion, we can see the quality. I think just sort of the quality of the people working on the site. If they're all driving, battered up utes, and they're all, every time you drive past, they're having a beer and that sort of stuff, then maybe not the best builder. But if it's a nice clean site and everyone seems to know what they're doing and just get along and doing their job, well, I'm a great believer in business that the business is never better than the quality of the person running it. Although it can deteriorate from there. And, I've found that people who run businesses, not just in this industry, that they set a standard, and if they employ someone who doesn't fit their quality of person, they don't last very long and they're moved on. Whereas you find that good businesses have a lot of good quality people. But, there's always the break of that rule. The variation of that. So, look, again, just down in research, the times that I've let myself down is I haven't done the research as well. We did a lot of research on the builders, went and spoke to them. You want to find a builder who's building the type of property that you want. if you're building single level units, you don't want someone who's building apartments. That's not what they specialise in. And in reverse, if you wanted to replicate feature older style homes, if that happens to be something that's the right thing in that area, you don't want someone who focuses on building the big square blocks, the very modern type things. So maybe that's not what they do. And then, of course, once you've sort of shortlisted those, you need to work out some of the prices. Sometimes, if you can find some developments that are similar to what you're looking at, that's nearing completion, go and have a chat with a builder. There's a builder's phone number on a board out the front of every site, so you ring them up. And while builders do get a lot of tire kickers and probably don't have a lot of time for it, if you're saying, I'm looking to do something just like what you're building, I'm looking for a builder, there's a fair chance they're going to listen to you. You'll probably be able to get a bit of an idea. So just roughly what sort of price for this, or what price per square, or what price per unit for these, and you start to get a bit of an idea. And I've come across some really good builders, but their prices just way out, well beyond what I know I can get it built for, and way beyond what can make a job profitable. So it's like, hey, well done on your work, but I'm sorry, that's not for me.
And so back to your 3-unit development.
Yep.
All worked out?
Yeah, all fine. Actually, decided that was not the first one. The first one, I was entirely the real estate agent for myself, having to deal with a whole lot of tire kickers, and I thought I got some strange questions from some of the younger people up in Ballarat, not having much of an idea, of asking questions about off the plan and things like that. I got some extraordinary questions, like it'd be selling off the plan. We'd have an ad on the realestate.com.au with an artist impression, and people would turn up to a vacant site and wondering why they haven't been built. I had a Chinese gentleman who was very interested in his feng shui, who asked if Unit 2 could be turned at 90 degrees. I did explain to him that wasn't possible. As much as I'd like to help him out, I just couldn't turn the unit around 90 degrees to face a different direction. And even one stage, because we had the temp fence up the front, I got an anonymous letter shoved in the wire, just sort of screwed up and shoved in the wire, telling us how terrible we were for knocking down a lovely old home. The old home was knocking itself down. So yeah, some interesting things there.
So you sold them all yourself?
Yep, sold all 3 ourselves. We had 2 sold pretty easy. It was all young people, all first home buyers. There was an Indian couple who I think the week that we went unconditional on that was the week they became Australian citizens, so it's a very great week for them. They were thrilled. A lovely young lady bought the Unit 3, and had a young couple who, when negotiating over Unit 2, were more interested in arguing with one another than working out a price. So that was, again, a bit of a story. I think he was putting up most of the money and she was putting up most of the objections, and that was a bit interesting. But yeah, all sold, so I saved a few dollars, but spent a lot of time and a lot of lost sleep over just the stresses of dealing with some of these people.
And so you moved on. What was the next project? The next couple of projects?
Probably more consistently, sort of slightly larger. Sort of the next one was a 4-unit site, very similar, old home, falling over, knocked it over, put 4 on. From then on, I've only done one which kept an existing property, which was one that was in the API magazine. They wanted to run a little series. I think we did about an 8-month series, just month by month, where we're up to over the process of keeping the existing, and had to knock off the back part of one to fit 2 in the backyard, whereas it was fairly common to just keep a house, put 1 in the backyard, which would have worked and made a very small profit, or knocking over the house and putting 3 on it, by removing the extension on the back and doing a little bit of reconfiguration internally. We were able to keep 2 single levels on the back, which end up making it a pretty good project, that one.
And so you've sort of consistently got bigger from there. I think you're doing 4 or 5 unit sites, then you got up to 7 or 8.
Yes, and look, it's not that it was particularly designed that way. As you go on, you again feeling a little bit more confident. Some people I know that are happy just doing dual locks and doing lots of them. They might have 2 or 3 on the go at a time. And so that if that's the case, every 9, 12 months, something like that, they roll out a profit. And that's what they do. That's replace their income. They might be making 100, 200,000 a year just by doing that, by having 2 or 3 rotating, 4 maybe. And if that's what they want to do, that's fantastic because it works for them. Other people might be doing the occasional very large one. And there could be a mix and match. I speak a lot through the training that we've done about finding your perfect site, working out something that really works for you, that fits in with your location, that for those who don't want to drive to Ballarat, don't drive to Ballarat. Don't try, because otherwise you're just going to convince yourself not to. You're going to spend a lot of time wasting your own time. If you're not going to be comfortable doing that, don't do that. Wait. Then you need to find what type of project, whether that's a renovation and add one. If you're no good at renovations, you've never done them, you hate them, you've got no skills, you don't want to go through the process of project managing, don't do one. Then it has to be a knock down and build.
I just did a renovation at home, Troy, and it just reminded me again why I don't want to do that renovate and keep strategy. Just start from scratch. Get someone else to do everything.
The live in and renovate, that's a completely different strategy altogether, which is a sign of insanity, I found, because I've done it myself. And each time I do something, even like not a full renovation, each time I just go, I should know better. But anyway, that's an entirely different story. But finding what's the perfect site for you, obviously need to fit in the financial, what you're able to do financially, but also what you might mentally be able to do financially. The bank might lend you $1 million, but if anything over 500,000 means you don't sleep at night, don't do that. Stick to the lower one, even just to start with, because once you get started, as I did, I'm sure everyone else is the same. You get started, you go, wow, it's a bit easier than I thought it was going to be. Then you go and do a bigger one if that's what you like.
Yeah, well, I had moments along the way in my first project where I certainly didn't think it was easier than I thought it was going to be, but we got there in the end, didn't we?
Well, you did take on a very big bite for your first go, and it didn't take a little nibble of the pie to see if it was too hot. You took an enormous bite, and
well, that was only because the pie that got served up to me was a lot bigger than what I ever intended on ordering. But yes, I've already covered that story many times on the podcast. But anyway, we got through it with your help. So I'm going to come back to the training bit in a little bit. But I think the latest project you've finished is a 7-unit site?
Close, 8.
8, there you go. So you've wrapped that one up and now you move on to the next one. So
I'm sorry, I thought you said the largest one. Sorry, the latest is a 7, yes.
So that one's all done and dusted?
Yes.
And so are you now at the point where you're doing multiple projects together? Or are you finishing one, moving on to the next one, slight overlap? How's it work now?
Over the last few years, probably both of those options.
Yeah.
There was times where I was doing multiple ones, and then also individual ones. A lot of it's to do with timing in my personal life, timing with the market. Whereas a few years ago I separated from my daughter's mother, and from that point on had a lot of time needed for the kids, and at that time had 4 projects on the go at various stages. While that was quite easily manageable, it wasn't as a single dad. So doing just what needed to be done business wise to enable the kids not to go through anything more than what they was absolute essential for them to go through to under the circumstances, meant that the business focus wasn't there. Combined with the fact that the market was pretty warm, whereas in the past I'd have agents ringing me up saying, I've got this site, I've got that site. I wasn't spending the time looking for those sites, and the market wasn't handing them on a platter to me either. So that led to a reduction of the amount of projects that I was doing. So now the circumstances have changed a little bit with the kids. The market's starting to turn. Properties are starting to come on the market. Just on just building a foundation now to greatly increase again. It's funny. A lot of people will say when the market's hot, "Oh, gee, it must be a great time to be a developer." It's actually the opposite, because while the prices might be moving up on what you're selling, they're moving up extraordinarily on what you're buying. and people are paying more than is possible to be profitable, which, while it's unfortunate for them that they might lose money or lose their house maybe even, it's unfortunate for them, but it's also unfortunate for yourself, because if they're buying all these at overpriced, we can't buy. It's a lot harder to buy, and even for the one that comes on the market that one of these people who are making mistakes aren't buying, the vendors have expectations, because the one down the road, just like theirs, sold for $1 million and mine must be worth $1 million, where realistically it's only worth 700, 800, whatever the case may be, and that's all I can afford to pay for it. There's the expectations, and that might sit there on the market for 6 or 12 months waiting for that price to come up, and it's not going to get there, but it still leaves that on that price. And then the next person comes along with a similar house to sell it, and you're going, well, that guy's selling it for $1 million, so mine must be worth about the same. So it takes a while for the reality to move back into the market, and I think we're just on the cusp of that now.
And so what are the things that you focus on most now for your projects? You got quite a few projects under the belt. What 2 or 3 things do you most focus on now to ensure they succeed? Okay, there you go. Part 1 of my chat with Troy Harris. I certainly enjoyed the trip down memory lane with him and hoped you picked up some gems along the way. Make sure to tune into part 2 to catch the rest of the conversation. Here are 3 things I took out of my discussion with Troy. 1. Your mindset helps decide your life. I know people keep banging on about having the right mindset, and it is almost a cliche, but it is actually true. We live in the world of our own making, and the funny thing is that you can create the life and world that you want. Not just by thinking about it, but working on it. The key is deciding what you want and then putting in place a plan to get there, and importantly, getting help along the way from people who have done it or know how to guide you. When you decide that nothing will stand in your way, then you just get on with it. Your brain has the amazing capacity to believe or be programmed, and coupled with your heart/desire, you can achieve incredible things. So if you are sitting there thinking about all the reasons why you can't do something, try flipping it around and asking about all the ways that you can. 2. Early success can be a curse. I have been down this path before. Sometimes having early success can lead you to be complacent about what you need to do to continue being successful. Troy talked about how he did well out of his first renovation, and he thought it was because of everything he did. Whereas he found a buyer willing to pay a great price for his homestead, which was a little unique. But when he did something more conventional, he came up against the weight of the market. I found that with my second project. I thought that since council supported, in fact pushed, for a more dense project on my first time, they would do the same on my next project, but they didn't, and it was a very costly lesson. 3. Identify your perfect site. This is a good tip from Troy. Once you identify your perfect site, it narrows your search parameters and focuses your effort. You are less likely to go down rabbit holes chasing potential development sites of all shapes, sizes, and locations. It also allows you to be clear with agents about what you are looking for so they can help find it. Troy gave a few things you can consider to identify your perfect site: the location, the project type, and the likely cost. As Troy advised, start off doing something you are comfortable with so that you can sleep at night. Obviously, I was daydreaming when Troy had that conversation with me all those years ago. Alright, if you enjoyed that conversation with Troy, then why not delve into the archives and take a listen to episode 13, where I speak with developer Matt Jones about how he went from being a postie to becoming a property entrepreneur. Matt had some great advice on how you can achieve phenomenal results.
Do something every day that's going to take you closer to who and what you want to be. If that's a property developer, then doing those things to get you there. And then if you can do that consistently over, say, 6 months or a year, it's just phenomenal how much you can achieve.
I'm sure you will enjoy that chat with Matt, so go back and take a listen to him in episode 13. Don't forget to email me if you are interested in learning how to become a property developer, justin@propertydeveloperpodcast.com, and check out my Instagram and Facebook pages for my latest developing videos, photos, and news at Property Developer Podcast. You can also find all the past episodes of the show at www.propertydeveloperpodcast.com. So until next time, May you start to create the life of your dreams.
You've been listening to the Property Developer Podcast. Tune in next time for more tips, ideas and inspiration to take your developing to the next level. For more developing love, make sure to visit propertydeveloperpodcast.com.